does that mean that demotivated men are producing less testosterone?
Data show that repeated failures take testosterone levels lower than they would be otherwise. The sex steroid hormones, testosterone and estrogen, of course, are involved in reproductive biology, but they are both vitally important, provided they are in the proper ratios, for motivational biology. So when we achieve wins repeatedly, and again, this doesn't matter if you're male or female, you achieve wins repeatedly. Testosterone is the molecule that eventually accesses not just cells to control their immediate physiology, but goes into the nucleus of those cells and controls their gene expression.
So does that mean that demotivated men are producing less testosterone?
The data show that repeated failures take testosterone levels lower than they would be otherwise. That is not to say that people with low testosterone will always fail. Those with higher testosterone always win. But just to be clear, because you are correct, but just people sometimes get hitched on this causal part. But indeed, one of the quickest ways to boost someone's testosterone is to have them achieve a win.
One of the things you do in behavior therapy constantly is you help people calibrate the zone of proximal development. So imagine that's Vygotsky's term, right? And so if you're in the zone of proximal development, you're pushing your skill development one increment forward. And it's one that you can actually manage. And so if you see people who are entirely stymied, we're sort of back to the cup of coffee or the coffee cup example, you want to find something they can do locally this week that would constitute at least a micro win. If you talk to someone, you say, well, why don't you try cleaning up your room? Because it's a complete catastrophic nightmare. It's a good place to start. This is often the case with people who are really demoralized and whose life is utterly chaotic. Like I had one client, he just had a child, and he didn't want to mess up this child, but he was living at home. He was like 35 years old. He had a child out of wedlock by accident, but he didn't want to be a useless father, and he was very afraid he was going to be. And he had good reason to. Like, he still lived at home. He lived in his high school bedroom, and it was a complete bloody mess. He was living like a 12-year-old, a bad 12-year-old. And so I said, well, when was the last time that your carpet was vacuumed? And he said, well, sometimes my mother does it, but it's probably been months. I said, well, why don't you just bring the vacuum cleaner into the room and just vacuum your carpet. That'll be your task for this week. And I knew that was a bigger task than you might think, because he'd been in that room for like 18 years and it was a mess. And so cleaning it up at all was a big deal. He told me that he dragged that bloody vacuum cleaner into the doorway and left it 45 degrees across the doorway and then stepped over it for the whole week without actually using it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, resistance, from a psychoanalytic perspective, because he saw the monster and was paralyzed. And so what we did was we reduced the task. I said, look, you've got some drawers in your bureau. They're probably a mess. Do you have a sock drawer? Yes. It said, clean up one half of the sock drawer this week. That's it. Just organize it. So you just keep cutting the tasks down week by week until you find the threshold for positive movement forward. And then what's cool about that too is there's a Pareto principle issue associated with it. So if you can find out where the person can start, it isn't linear progress, it's exponential progress forward. And so even if they have to start at a micro level, it doesn't really matter because they get much better at it very, very rapidly as they accrue successes. Maybe that's because they're learning in the way that you described.
That is absolutely key about the dopamine system, is that it has a fast component. Dopamine is released, more adrenaline, aka epinephrine, can be released, and you can, this sort of upward spiral of energy and sort of success with the occasional drops, right? I mean, nobody succeeds in every task, right? Sometimes the phone rings or the doorbell rings and you fail, you fail to clean the cup. You come home, are you going to crash into a puddle of tears? No, you just clean it then and then put it away, right? But there's a slow system associated with achieving wins, even small wins. And that slow system is in the form of hormonal control that then translates to gene control. So two hormones in particular, testosterone and estrogen, which are present in both men and women, males and females, but to varying degrees, are both secreted when the dopamine system is activated. This has to do with the relationship between dopaminergic neurons and the pituitary gland, which releases gonadotropins and luteinizing hormones, which then stimulate the testes and the ovaries, et cetera, to release the so-called sex steroid hormones. The sex steroid hormones, testosterone and estrogen, of course, are involved in reproductive biology, but they are both vitally important, provided they are in the proper ratios, for motivational biology.